Yeah.
I mean, I can give you a dark horse for the top 5, a top 5 finisher. I mean, it's a guy you're going to take in round 2, but I think Cam Akers has a shot at 2,000 total yards. He paced for that much based on his last 6 games, including the playoffs. And I don't know how many catches he's going to have. I think he'd be lucky to have north of 45 in a 17-game season, but I think he will also benefit greatly from having Matthew Stafford under center in LA.
He's so polarizing because, I mean, he did that without doing anything in the beginning of the season.
He got beat up.
Yeah. And is he going to get beat up again? I mean, that's the concern.
Yeah.
It's why I said Daryl Henderson. It's another scenario of if the guy who has the chance goes down, then the backup guy could be great. And Daryl Henderson, look, he wasn't as efficient or as prolific as Akers was, but he got that work at the beginning of the season. He was getting, double-digit carries. He wasn't working as much in the passing game, but at that point when Akers was doing it, Henderson wasn't around. At least Akers was around when Henderson was doing his, big numbers at the start of the season. So it's I mean, Akers could easily do that, and I spoke to him last week, and he was as excited as anybody you could talk to get the chance to, build off what he did at the end of the season. But the 2 playoff games, which is what a lot of people look at, Henderson didn't play in those games. And so can he be that featured guy without somebody else being there? And the nice thing is Malcolm Brown's gone. The downside is do they like Henderson enough that he's going to be too much of a factor to ruin what Akers could be?
Akers had 11 catches in 14 games. That's going to stand out to people, but he had 30 catches his junior year at Florida State. He can catch the ball. Matthew Stafford with the Lions, different coaches, different coordinators. Detroit, let me say this, has had a 50 catch running back 7 of the last 9 seasons. And they've had 2 other instances where Reggie Bush once, Kerryon Johnson once have been on pace for 50. So he throws to his running backs, and Akers can do it. And they've talked about him. They've talked about using him as a receiver. They've talked about getting him involved.
Oh, yeah.
You almost feel a little bit better about him improving his receiving numbers than J.K. Dobbins.
I do. Yeah.
I think you have to. But, I asked him about that, and he said, that's something that he's hoping is going to come to fruition, that they're going to actually use him more in that because he did it at Florida State too.
Yeah. And we've seen the Rams do it before. I mean, it was with Gurley back when Gurley was amazing. He caught a ton of footballs. So I think it's possible. Maybe he can get to 50 catches in 17 games.
Yeah,
55 catches.
You can like Cam Akers all you want. Are you really taking him over DeAndre Hopkins or Stephon Diggs? I guess you could try to take.
Yeah, if I want to lock up that running back spot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just feels like very
It's a risk. It's a risk.
Huge risk. Huge.
Probably.
Okay.
But what's the drop off at receiver by the time you're up again in late round 3?
I actually think it's fairly significant.
Okay.
Well, what do you think? I mean,
I don't think it's. It could be a couple of points a week, which is significant, I guess. But I know I'm going to find a receiver. Spot? Yeah, I know I'm going to get a receiver that I'm totally fine starting in round 3 and 4.
The question becomes: would you rather have Akers and CeeDee Lamb, or would you rather have Hopkins and Mike Davis?
No,
he'll be a little better than Mike Davis.
Yeah, okay, Hopkins and David Montgomery.
I think
that's better.
I'll tell you what: if it's Chris Carson, then
don't say it.
Is that not different? Because I like Carson better than
it could be. I mean, it's you're taking that risk. It's like maybe CeeDee Lamb's probably not the best example because you're talking about 2 guys that are.
Could it be Robert Woods or Allen Robinson?
or Amari Cooper? If you're taking what Akers could be plus what Amari Cooper has been versus what David Montgomery was last year or Chris Carson was when he's been healthy, and DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, I think a lot of people probably take the latter.
What would you guys do? Let's look at it.
I would take the former.
I forgot. I don't know.
Akers first.
All right. So the running backs,
Akers, and then like Cooper, Woods, Allen Robinson, one of those guys, or Hopkins / Diggs in round 2, and then Montgomery or Carson in round 3. I'm taking the guy that's got the best shot at 2,000 total yards.
Well, yeah, wide receiver's not going to do that.
No, these wide receivers that we're talking about are in the 1,300 yard, 100 catch range.
Who?
Diggs and Hopkins.
Are you not selling them short on their yards a little bit here? We're talking 17 games. I think they get to 1,500 yards.
I would say 1,500 easy.
Okay,
if they're right.
Sure. So then the catch is more than makes up for that.
Well, yeah.
But who gets more touchdowns, and which position do you want to, lock up first? And this is sky high. This is the ceiling for everybody. Maybe it's more reasonable to say that the receiver can hit that It's more reasonable to say that one of these receivers can get you 1,500 yards and 10 touchdowns and 100 catches versus Cam Akers getting 2,000 total.
That's my point.
And 12
well, I think the thing is, though,
catches.
you control your own destiny a little bit more because you can take one of these running backs in the range that you know you're going to get them, whereas you have to hope to get a Carson or a Montgomery if they're still there with somebody else doesn't snipe you, and then you're settling for a Mike Davis or a Chase Edmonds, as opposed to there's that large group of wide receivers, whether it's the unproven CeeDee Lamb or Jamar Chase or whatever guy you're gonna throw in that range, or it's the Robert Woods or Allen Robinson or Mike Evans or Chris Godwin or those guys, and you're pairing them with what those running backs in the hope that they can be. There's obviously more risk with the running backs. That's always going to be the case.
Yeah, I find it funny that Akers. I understand that Jonathan Taylor was destined to be everybody's favorite year 2 running back. Totally makes sense. I find it interesting that Akers has just become number 2. Does anybody have a different running back ranked ahead? I think Heath has Swift ahead of Akers in PPR.
I have the rankings up. I can tell you in PPR.
Yeah,
in PPR, Heath has.
I've got Najee ahead of Swift. I've got Antonio Gibson ahead of Swift and PPR.
Ahead of.
I'm sorry, I'm in the top 200. Heath has.
Well, anyway, I just think that people are so.
Heath has Akers ahead of Swift. It was interesting though. This Fantasy Pros podcast that I did, Swift fell to the 3rd round. And was so Kyle Yates, one of the analysts on Fantasy Pros, he took Chris Carson ahead of Swift, and he said he's concerned about the offense being bad, Jared Goff being bad, Jamal Williams being a problem in the passing game for Swift, and brought up a lot of the concerns that I think a lot of people have, on top of the fact that they still may sign Todd Gurley, who they brought in for to work out. So if in fact there's another mouth to feed there, Swift could be a little bit of a risk, but he was on pace for over 50 catches last year. We saw the touchdowns. We saw what he was able to do once they finally let him be the lead running back there. So there's a lot to like about him, but I could see Gibson being better. I mean, look, there's this group, and I just finished writing a story for our magazine about this group. This group has bust potential written all over it. I mean, from Taylor with, as Dave said, Marlon Mack and Nyheim Hines being on passing downs. And look, the schedule was great for Taylor down the stretch, but now there's a volatile quarterback as opposed to a calming presence at quarterback. And what happens if Carson Wentz stinks again? Akers, we just brought up, Adam, you said the reception total, and if Henderson is there, Gibson is still trying to work his way into learning the running back position, and they have a guy who can catch passes. Clyde Edwards-Helaire was a bust in the second half of the season when they brought somebody else in. Who's to say they don't bring somebody else in? Dobbins doesn't catch the ball, at least as of now. So you can see the bust potential for that group, and it's going to be the group I think that decides fantasy in a lot of ways. Because,
I was about to say that. Yep.
And like I did some research on this, like just looking at comparative classes. The only one that comes close in the last 10 years is the 2017 class, which was Fournette, McCaffrey, Aaron Jones, Kamara.
Cook Mixon or no?
No, that might. So. I don't know. Let me find it. But
it was
that group, and that group continues to produce. So. But in terms of what they did as rookies and sophomores.
Yeah, they are going. I mean, they're all being drafted so early. These sophomore running backs, they're going to have a huge impact on fantasy outcomes. Let's see, running backs.
Yeah, 2017 draft did have Cook.
Right, Fournette, McCaffrey, Cook, Mixon, Kamara, Kareem Hunt. Holy cow! Deontay Foreman, James Conner. You had Samaje Perine, Tariq Cohen, Jamal Williams, Marlon later.
As rookies, I just did the ones that finished in the top 20. Fournette was 8. Year 2, he was 12. This is PPR in points per game. McCaffrey was 15. He was 3 in his second year. Cook, even though he played 4 games, was number 9. He was 18 his second year. Injuries were a problem, obviously, for both those years. Kamara was 4 and 4 both seasons. Hunt was 5 and 8, and that was 11 games the next year. But that also had James Conner as well in that class.
So that you'd have to say they were pretty successful as year 2 backs.
That's the best class that I've seen. And again, I just went back to 2010 and looking at that. What I did was I looked at the running backs drafted in the first 3 rounds, guys that finished in the top. I'm sorry, I did top 30 in points per game and how they did the following season. But that's the only group that had guys that finished in both categories multiple year over year, as many as that group did. So this group can be good, and they didn't have as many finished in the top 30 points per game. You know, Cam Akers was a disaster in terms of his overall points because he was so bad in the beginning, and he didn't exactly miss a lot of time.
Right.